The Bible and Money, Wisdom for Wealth, Stewardship, and the Soul. By David Rousseau. What if everything you believe about money is incomplete? Not because money doesn't matter, but because you've been taught to see it as the goal, instead of the mirror. A mirror that quietly reflects your priorities, your fears, your trust, and ultimately, your soul. The Bible doesn't just talk about money, it confronts it. It challenges the way you earn it, spend it, save it, and cling to it. It asks uncomfortable questions. Who really owns what you have? Why is enough so hard to define? And what is your wealth actually costing you? This book is not about chasing wealth for its own sake. It's about understanding money's power, handling it wisely, and learning how wealth can serve a meaningful life instead of controlling it. It's about understanding why money holds so much power over us, and how to take that power back. Introduction. Why money matters in Scripture. Money is one of the most consistent and revealing themes woven throughout the Bible. It appears in stories of kings and laborers, in teachings about justice and generosity, and in warnings about greed and misplaced trust. Its presence is not accidental. Money matters in Scripture because it touches nearly every part of human life. But the Bible approaches money differently than most modern conversations do. Today, money is often framed as a measure of success, security, or status. It promises freedom, yet frequently produces anxiety. It offers comfort, yet can quietly reshape priorities in ways we barely notice. The pursuit of more becomes so normal that it is rarely questioned. The Bible cuts through that assumption. Rather than treating money as the ultimate goal, it presents it as a test, one that exposes what we truly value. It is less concerned with how much a person has, and more concerned with how that person thinks about what they have. In this way, money becomes deeply spiritual. It reveals trust or fear, contentment or restlessness, generosity or self-preservation. Scripture does not condemn wealth itself. Some of its central figures possess great resources, while others lived with very little. What remains consistent is not the amount of wealth, but the posture of the heart. Wealth can be used to bless or to exploit, to build or to destroy. The difference lies in how it is understood and handled. This book is not about rigid financial formulas or quick strategies for success. Instead, it explores timeless principles for handling, building, and using wealth wisely, ideas that have shaped how people relate to money for centuries. These principles speak to stewardship rather than ownership, purpose rather than accumulation, and trust rather than control. They also challenge assumptions. What if having more is not the same as being secure? What if giving is not a loss, but a form of gain? What if true wealth has little to do with numbers at all? Whether you are struggling financially, building wealth, or simply trying to make wiser decisions, the biblical perspective invites a shift. It calls for a deeper awareness of how money influences not just what we do, but who we become. Because in the end, money is never just about money. Chapter 1. The Ownership Principle. At the heart of the Bible's teaching about money is a truth that challenges instinct. You are not the ultimate owner of anything you have. This idea cuts against the grain of modern thinking. We are taught to measure progress by accumulation and to define success by what belongs to us. Ownership feels natural because it gives us a sense of control and identity. Yet Scripture redirects that assumption, insisting that everything, resources, opportunities, even the ability to earn, originates from God. When this perspective takes hold, it changes the role we believe we play. We move from being owners to being stewards. A steward does not possess. A steward manages. That distinction reshapes how money is viewed and handled. Instead of asking, "What can I do with my money?" stewardship asks, "What should I do with what has been entrusted to me?" The difference is subtle in wording, but profound in impact. This shift challenges entitlement. Ownership says, "I deserve this." Stewardship says, "I am responsible for this." One centers on rights, the other centers on purpose. With that change comes a new level of awareness. Spending becomes more intentional. Decisions are no longer driven solely by impulse or desire, but by consideration. It is not about eliminating enjoyment or comfort, it is about aligning choices with values that extend beyond the moment. Stewardship also exposes the illusion of control that money often provides. It is easy to believe that financial resources create security, that enough money can protect against uncertainty. But life consistently proves otherwise. Circumstances shift, plans unravel, and what once seemed stable can quickly change. Recognizing that everything ultimately belongs to God loosens that illusion. It reminds us that money, while useful, is not a final source of security. It is temporary, and it cannot carry the full weight of our trust. This realization does not lead to passivity, it leads to clarity. If money is not the foundation, then it becomes a tool rather than a master. It can be used wisely without being depended on completely. Stewardship, then, is not about restriction. It is about alignment. It calls for thoughtful management, turning with integrity, spending with intention, saving with wisdom, and giving with generosity. Each decision becomes part of a larger pattern that reflects what truly matters. There is also an unexpected freedom in this perspective. Ownership often brings pressure, the need to maintain, protect, and increase what we have. It ties identity to possessions and success to accumulation. Stewardship releases that burden. It allows us to engage with money without being defined by it. In the end, the ownership principle leads to a question that lingers beneath every financial decision. How are you managing what has been entrusted to you? It is not a question of quantity, but of faithfulness. Not how much you have, but how you handle what you've been given. Because when you stop seeing money as something you own, you begin to see it for what it truly is, something you are trusted to use well. Chapter 2. The Danger of Loving Money. Money, by itself, is neutral. It carries no moral weight until it is placed in human hands. Yet the Bible draws a sharp distinction between money and the love of money, a distinction that often goes unnoticed, but makes all the difference. The problem is not possession, it is attachment. Loving money means more than simply wanting financial stability or working towards success. It is a deeper posture of the heart. It occurs when money moves from being a tool to becoming a priority, when it begins to shape identity, influence decisions, and quietly take the place of what matters most. This shift is rarely obvious at first. It often begins with good intentions, the desire to provide, to feel secure, to avoid hardship. These are reasonable goals, but over time, the pursuit of money can become consuming. What once served a purpose starts to define it. When money becomes central, it begins to demand more time, more energy, more compromise. It can subtly influence choices, what we value, how we treat others, and what we are willing to sacrifice. Relationships may take a back seat. Integrity can become negotiable. Rest feels unproductive. Enough is never quite enough. This is the quiet power of loving money. It promises satisfaction, but rarely delivers it. No matter how much is gained, there is always the sense that something more is needed. The finish line keeps moving. What once felt like abundance begins to feel ordinary, even insufficient. This cycle creates tension. Instead of bringing peace, money begins to produce anxiety, the fear of losing it, the pressure to maintain it, the constant need to grow it. It becomes both the goal and the burden. The Bible exposes this pattern, not to condemn ambition, but to reveal its limits. When money is elevated beyond its proper place, it cannot carry the weight we put on it. It was never meant to provide identity or ultimate security. At its core, the love of money is a trust issue. It shifts dependence away from something lasting to something temporary. It places confidence in what can fluctuate, disappear, or fail. And when that foundation becomes unstable, everything built on it begins to feel uncertain. Breaking free from this attachment does not require rejecting money altogether. It requires reordering it. Money must return to its proper role as a servant, not a master. This involves honest reflection, not just asking how much money you have, but how much influence it holds over you. Does it dictate your decisions? Does it shape your sense of worth? Does it create fear when it is threatened? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones, because the danger of loving money is not always visible on the surface. It often hides beneath success, discipline, and even responsibility. It can exist in abundance or in scarcity. It is not measured by numbers, but by priority. Freedom begins when money loses its grip. When it is no longer the source of identity or security, it becomes lighter. It can be used, shared, and managed without controlling the heart. It no longer demands everything, it simply serves its purpose. And in that shift, something changes. Contentment becomes possible. Generosity becomes natural. Peace becomes less dependent on circumstances, because when money is no longer loved, it no longer has the power to rule. Chapter 3. Contentment in a culture of more. Few ideas in Scripture feel as out of place in the modern world as contentment. We live in a culture built on more income, more possessions, more upgrades, more progress. Every system around us reinforces the same message: what you have is not enough yet. There is always something better within reach, and satisfaction is just one more step away. Contentment disrupts that narrative. It does not deny desire or ambition, nor does it discourage growth. Instead, it redefines the starting point. Contentment begins with the recognition that what you have right now holds value not because it is perfect, but because it is sufficient for this moment. This way of thinking is not passive, it is intentional. Without contentment, desire becomes endless. Each achievement only fuels the next pursuit. Each gain resets expectations. What once felt like success quickly becomes normal, and the cycle continues without pause. This constant striving creates a subtle kind of exhaustion. It is not always physical, but it is deeply mental and emotional. There is always something to chase, something to improve, something to compare. The result is a life that is always reaching forward but rarely at rest. Contentment breaks that cycle. It introduces the ability to pause and say, "This is enough for today," not as a statement of limitation, but as an expression of peace. It allows enjoyment without comparison and gratitude without conditions. This does not mean ignoring goals or refusing to improve one's situation. Growth and contentment are not opposites. In fact, contentment provides a healthier foundation for growth. It ensures that progress is driven by purpose rather than pressure. A content person can pursue more without being controlled by it. This is what makes contentment so powerful and so rare. When comparison enters the picture, contentment is often the first thing to disappear. It is difficult to feel satisfied when constantly measuring your life against someone else's. What you have begins to feel smaller, even if nothing has actually changed. The Bible's approach to contentment challenges this mindset at its root. It shifts focus away from comparison and toward gratitude. Instead of asking, "Why don't I have what they have?" it asks, "What have I already been given?" Gratitude strengthens contentment. It brings attention back to what is present rather than what is missing. Without it, even abundance can feel empty. Contentment also changes the way money is used. When enough is clearly defined, financial decisions become more grounded. Spending becomes less reactive. Saving becomes more purposeful. Generosity becomes easier, because giving no longer feels like losing something essential. In contrast, a lack of contentment often leads to overconsumption. Money is spent not out of need, but out of dissatisfaction. Purchases become temporary solutions to deeper restlessness, offering short-lived satisfaction before the cycle begins again. Contentment addresses the root, not just the behavior. It quiets the internal pressure to constantly acquire. It creates space for clarity, allowing money to serve meaningful purposes instead of filling emotional gaps. There is also a deeper dimension to contentment, one that goes beyond circumstances. True contentment is not dependent on how much you have. It can exist in seasons of plenty and in seasons of lack. This is what makes it stable. It is not tied to external conditions, which are always changing, but to an internal posture that remains steady. This kind of contentment brings a sense of freedom. It frees you from needing more in order to feel complete. It frees you from comparison that distorts perspective. It frees you from the constant pressure to prove something through what you own. In a culture that constantly pushes for more, contentment is a quiet act of resistance. It says that value is not found in accumulation, and that peace does not come from reaching the next level. It recognizes that life is not measured solely by what is gained, but also by what is appreciated. Because in the end, the person who has the most is not the one who accumulates the most, but the one who needs the least. Chapter 4. Earning with Integrity. How money is earned matters just as much as how much is earned. This idea stands in quiet contrast to a results-driven world, where outcomes often overshadow process. Success is typically measured in numbers: income, profit, growth, while the methods used to achieve those results are sometimes overlooked or justified. But the Bible places weight not only on the outcome, but on the path taken to get there. Earning with integrity means that the pursuit of money never overrides what is right. It is about honesty in transactions, fairness in relationships, and consistency in character, especially when no one is watching. Integrity does not shift based on convenience. It does not bend under pressure or adapt to whatever produces the fastest gain. This kind of earning requires restraint. Opportunities for shortcuts are everywhere. Cutting corners, bending truth, or taking advantage of others can often produce quicker results. In the moment, these choices may seem small, even harmless, but over time, they shape both reputation and character. Wealth gained without integrity carries a hidden cost. It may increase financial standing, but it erodes trust both from others and within oneself. There is a difference between having money and having peace about how it was obtained. One can be counted, the other cannot. The Bible consistently warns against dishonest gain because it recognizes this deeper impact. Financial success that compromises integrity is ultimately unstable. It may appear strong on the surface, but it lacks a solid foundation. In contrast, honest work is consistently affirmed. There is dignity in earning through effort, persistence, and fairness. This kind of work may not always produce immediate results, but it builds something more lasting than income alone. It builds trust. It builds credibility. It builds a sense of alignment between what you do and who you are. Integrity also influences how others are treated in the process of earning. It challenges exploitation using people purely as a means to increase profit. It calls for fairness in wages, respect in leadership, and responsibility in business practices. Money is not meant to come at the expense of another person's well-being. This principle extends beyond formal business settings. It applies to everyday decisions, small interactions, private choices, unseen moments. Integrity is not reserved for major ethical dilemmas. It is formed in consistent, ordinary actions. Over time, those actions compound. A person who earns with integrity develops a different relationship with money. It is no longer something to hide or defend. It carries a sense of clarity. There is confidence not just in what has been gained, but in how it was gained. This does not mean the path is always easy. There may be moments when integrity appears to cost more than it benefits, when honesty leads to missed opportunities or slower progress. In those moments, the temptation to compromise can be strong, but integrity is not measured by immediate reward. It is measured by consistency over time. It is a long-term investment in character that outlasts short-term gains. While dishonest success may rise quickly, it often struggles to endure. Integrity, though sometimes slower, creates stability that lasts. There is also a deeper dimension to this principle. Earning with integrity reflects trust. Trust that doing what is right is not ultimately a disadvantage. It acknowledges that financial outcomes are not the only measure of success. Character matters, process matters, and in the end, how something is built determines how well it stands. Money earned with integrity does more than provide resources. It supports a life that is aligned, grounded, and whole, because the true value of what you earn is not just found in the amount, but in the honesty behind it. Chapter 5. The Wisdom of Saving. Saving is often seen as a purely practical habit, a matter of discipline, planning, and delayed gratification. Yet the Bible presents it as something more. It frames saving not as fear-driven accumulation, but as an expression of wisdom. To save is to recognize that life is not static. Seasons change, income fluctuates, unexpected needs arise. Without preparation, even small disruptions can become overwhelming. Saving creates space between stability and crisis. It provides margin, the ability to respond rather than react. This kind of foresight is not rooted in anxiety, but in awareness. It acknowledges that while the future is uncertain, preparation is still possible. Setting aside resources is a way of respecting that uncertainty without being controlled by it. It is not a denial of faith, but a practical extension of responsibility. In this sense, saving becomes part of stewardship. If resources are entrusted rather than owned, then managing them wisely includes planning for what lies ahead. It means thinking beyond immediate needs and considering future responsibilities, both personal and relational. Saving is not just about self-preservation. It also creates the capacity to support others when unexpected needs arise within a family, a community, or even a broader crisis. Those who have prepared are often in a position to help. In this way, saving is not only protective, it can also be generous. However, the Bible's perspective on saving is balanced. It affirms preparation, but it warns against excess. Saving can quietly shift from wisdom to hoarding when it becomes driven by fear or control. Instead of creating peace, it begins to reflect anxiety and need to secure every possible outcome, to eliminate all risk. But complete security is never achievable. No amount of saving can fully remove uncertainty. When saving becomes an attempt to control the future entirely, it loses its purpose. It no longer creates margin, it creates tension. This is where intention matters. Why saving is purposeful. It has direction. It is tied to real needs, thoughtful goals, and responsible planning. It is not about accumulating without end, but about preparing with clarity. Questions begin to shape the practice. What am I preparing for? What level of stability is reasonable? At what point does preparation become excess? These are not questions with fixed answers, but they help define boundaries. Saving also requires patience. It is built slowly, often in small, consistent steps. There is rarely immediate reward. The benefits are often invisible until they are needed. This can make saving feel less satisfying than spending, which produces instant results. But over time, the value becomes clear. A financial cushion brings a different kind of peace. It reduces pressure in moments of uncertainty. It allows decisions to be made with greater freedom rather than desperation. It provides the ability to endure challenges without immediate crisis. This stability is not just financial, it is emotional. Knowing that there is preparation for the unexpected changes how situations are experienced. It replaces panic with perspective and urgency with calm. At the same time, saving must remain in its proper place. It is a tool, not a source of identity or ultimate security. When it is held too tightly, it can create the same kind of attachment as any other form of wealth. The goal is not to trust in what has been stored, but to use it wisely when needed. Saving, at its best, reflects balance. It prepares without fearing. It plans without controlling. It builds without clinging. In a world that often swings between impulse and anxiety, this kind of balance is rare, but it is also powerful, because the purpose of saving is not simply to accumulate, it is to create stability, freedom, and the ability to respond wisely when it matters most. Chapter 6. The Power of Generosity. Generosity sits at the center of the Bible's teaching on money. It is not treated as an optional virtue or an occasional act of kindness, but as a defining posture, one that reveals how a person truly understands what they have been given. At its core, generosity challenges a deeply rooted instinct, the desire to hold on. Money creates a sense of security, and releasing it can feel like losing control. The natural response is to protect, to accumulate, to ensure there is always enough. But generosity moves in the opposite direction. It opens the hand instead of closing it. This is what makes it powerful. Giving is not just a financial action. It is a shift in perspective. It recognizes that money is not meant to be kept at all costs, but to be used with purpose. It breaks the assumption that more must always be stored and instead introduces the idea that some of what we have is meant to be shared. In doing so, generosity exposes what we trust. If giving feels threatening, it often reveals how tightly security is tied to money. If it feels freeing, it reflects a different foundation, one where trust is not placed solely in what is held, but in something deeper. This is why generosity is often described not as loss, but as gain. The gain is not always financial, and it is rarely immediate. Instead, it appears in less measurable ways. Relationships are strengthened, communities are supported, needs are met, and within the giver, something shifts. Greed loses its hold, and perspective widens. Generosity also reshapes how money is viewed. When money is only accumulated, it tends to narrow focus inward. It becomes about personal goals, personal comfort, personal advancement. But when money is given, its impact expands outward. It begins to touch lives beyond one's own, creating value that extends beyond personal benefit. This outward movement aligns money with purpose. It transforms it from something that simply serves the individual into something that contributes to something larger. In this way, generosity connects financial decisions with meaning. However, true generosity is not defined by amount. It is defined by willingness. A person with little can be deeply generous, while a person with much can remain closed. Generosity is not measured by how much is given, but by the posture behind the giving. It is about choosing to share, even when it would be easier not to. This makes generosity accessible to everyone. It is not reserved for those with abundance. It begins wherever a person is, with whatever they have. Even small acts of giving can carry significant impact both for the receiver and the giver. At the same time, generosity requires intentionality. It does not happen by accident. Without thought, money naturally flows toward personal use. Giving must be chosen. It must be prioritized. It often requires planning, just like saving or spending. But unlike many financial habits, generosity has a unique effect. It loosens the grip of money on the heart. The more freely money is given, the less power it holds. It no longer defines security or identity in the same way. It becomes lighter, easier to manage, less central. This is where freedom begins, not in having unlimited resources, but in not being controlled by them. Generosity also creates a ripple effect. One act of giving often leads to another. It inspires, encourages, and builds a culture where care replaces indifference. In this way, generosity multiplies not always in money, but in impact. And that impact lasts, because while money itself is temporary, what it does in the hands of a generous person can carry lasting significance. In the end, generosity is not about reducing what you have, it is about redefining what it is for. Chapter 7. Debt and Financial Bondage. Debt is one of the most common and often most misunderstood realities of financial life. In many ways, it is normalized. Borrowing is built into modern systems, encouraged as a tool for progress, convenience, and opportunity. Yet the Bible approaches debt with caution, describing it not merely as a financial arrangement, but as a form of constraint. Debt creates obligation. At its simplest, it means that part of your future is already spoken for. Income that has not yet been earned is committed to past decisions. This is what gives debt its weight. It reaches forward, shaping choices before they are even made. Because of this, debt affects more than finances. It influences freedom. When obligations increase, flexibility decreases. Decisions become limited. Options that might otherwise be available are no longer possible, because resources are already allocated. What appears manageable at first can gradually become restrictive. This is why the Bible often describes debt in terms of servitude, not as a moral condemnation, but as a practical reality. When you owe, you are tied to the one you owe. There is a dependency created, one that shifts a measure of control away from you. This does not mean all debt is inherently wrong. There are situations where borrowing may be necessary, or even wise investments in education, housing, or essential needs that cannot be met otherwise. The issue is not the existence of debt, but the posture toward it. Debt becomes dangerous when it is entered lightly, when borrowing is driven by impulse rather than necessity, or when it is used to sustain a lifestyle beyond one's means. It begins to create pressure. What once felt like access becomes burden. Payments accumulate. Stress increases. The sense of freedom quietly diminishes. This pattern is easy to fall into. Debt can make more seem immediately attainable. It shortens the distance between desire and possession. Instead of waiting, saving, or reconsidering, borrowing allows for instant action. But that convenience comes at a cost, one that is often delayed, but not avoided. Over time, unmanaged debt can reshape priorities. Instead of money being directed toward meaningful goals, it is redirected toward obligations. Instead of building stability, resources are used to maintain commitments already made. The focus shifts from growth to maintenance. This is where the idea of financial bondage becomes clear. It is not always dramatic. It does not always appear as crisis. Often, It is subtle, a steady limitation that restricts movement, reduces options, and creates ongoing pressure. The Bible's caution toward debt is rooted in this understanding. It encourages restraint. It calls for awareness before entering into obligations. It invites careful consideration of not just what is being gained, but what is being given up in the process. Avoiding unnecessary debt is not about fear, it is about preserving freedom. Freedom to make choices without constant financial pressure. Freedom to respond to opportunities. Freedom to give, to save, and to live without being tightly bound to past decisions. For those already carrying debt, the path forward begins with clarity, acknowledging the reality of what is owed, creating a plan to reduce it, exercising discipline over time. This process is rarely quick, but it is possible, and each step taken toward reducing debt restores a measure of freedom. There is also an important shift in mindset, moving from dependence on borrowing to reliance on wise management, from immediate gratification to long-term stability, from reaction to intention. Debt, when approached carelessly, can quietly take control, but when approached with caution or reduced with discipline, it loses that power. In the end, the goal is not simply to avoid debt altogether, but to live in a way where financial decisions create freedom, not limit it. Chapter 8. Wealth and Responsibility. Wealth is rarely just about possession. In the biblical worldview, it is closely tied to responsibility. This connection is often overlooked in modern thinking, where wealth is primarily seen as personal achievement or reward. It represents success, effort, or even luck. Once acquired, it is commonly viewed as something that exists for personal use and enjoyment. But Scripture introduces a different dimension. Wealth carries obligation. The more a person has, the more they are expected to consider not only themselves, but others. Wealth is not presented as a private endpoint, but as a public opportunity. It creates influence, access, and capacity, all of which come with responsibility. This principle reshapes how success is understood. It challenges the idea that financial growth is solely for personal elevation. Instead, it suggests that increase is paired with expectation. Resources are not just for comfort, but for contribution. Responsibility begins with awareness. Those who have more are in a position to see needs others cannot ignore. They have the ability to support, to uplift, and to provide stability where there is lack. This is not framed as optional generosity, but as part of what it means to hold resources wisely. Wealth, in this sense, is not neutral. It amplifies whatever posture the heart already holds. In a person who values only themselves, wealth can deepen isolation and self-focus. In a person who values others, wealth can expand care and impact. This is why humility is central to handling wealth well. Humility keeps perspective grounded. It reminds a person that increase is not solely the result of personal effort, but often a combination of opportunity, timing, support, and circumstances beyond individual control. This awareness prevents pride from distorting judgment. At the same time, responsibility requires action. It is not enough to simply acknowledge that wealth could be used for good. It must actually be directed toward meaningful purposes. This may include helping those in need, supporting communities, investing in opportunities that benefit others, or creating systems of fairness and stability. Wealth without responsibility becomes self-contained. It circulates only within personal boundaries and eventually loses its broader purpose. It can create comfort, but not necessarily meaning. It can provide security, but not necessarily significance. The Bible consistently pushes against this inward focus. It presents wealth as something that flows outward. When it is held with open hands, it becomes a channel for impact. When it is held tightly, it can become static, accumulating without influence. This does not mean wealth is inherently negative. It is a resource. Its value depends on direction. In the right hands, guided by wisdom and humility, it can produce significant good. In unchecked form, it can reinforce imbalance. Responsibility also includes restraint. Not every opportunity to increase wealth is aligned with wisdom. Not every profitable path reflects integrity or purpose. Sometimes responsibility means choosing not only what to pursue, but what to avoid. There is also responsibility in influence. Wealth often creates a voice, whether in business, community, or broader society. That voice can be used to shape outcomes, set standards, and affect others' well-being. How that influence is used matters as much as the wealth itself. Over time, wealth reveals priorities. It shows what is considered important, what is worth investing in, and what is worth protecting. In this way, money becomes less about status and more about reflection. The key question shifts from how much do I have to what am I doing with what I have. This is where responsibility becomes personal, not abstract, because wealth is not just a measure of success. It is a measure of stewardship in action. Chapter 9. Trusting God versus trusting money. At some point, every financial life reaches a quiet crossroads. It is not always obvious, and it rarely presents itself as a single dramatic decision. Instead, it shows up in everyday thinking, where security is placed, what is feared, and what is depended on when uncertainty rises. The Bible frames this tension clearly: trust in God or trust in money, not as equal options, but as competing foundations. Money naturally invites trust. It feels tangible, measurable, and controllable. It can be saved, invested, and planned around. It responds to effort and discipline in predictable ways. Because of this, it can easily begin to feel like the most reliable source of stability. Over time, it becomes more than a resource, it becomes a reference point. People look to their financial situation to determine whether life is safe, whether the future is secure, whether decisions are wise. A strong account balance brings calm. A weak one brings anxiety. Without noticing it, money begins to function as a signal for peace or panic. This is where trust quietly shifts, not necessarily away from belief in God, but toward dependence on what is visible and immediate. The invisible becomes secondary to the measurable. Faith becomes something acknowledged, while finances become something relied upon. The Bible challenges this reordering. It does not deny the usefulness of money or the importance of planning. Instead, it questions its final authority. It asks what happens when financial security and spiritual trust point in different directions. Which one carries more weight? Trusting God, in this context, does not mean ignoring financial responsibility. It does not encourage carelessness, lack of planning, or avoidance of practical wisdom. Instead, it repositions ultimate confidence. Money is acknowledged as useful, but not ultimate, necessary, but not final. This distinction matters because money is unstable by nature. It changes value. It can be lost. It can be affected by external forces outside of personal control. Even careful planning cannot eliminate uncertainty. Because of this, placing ultimate trust in money creates a fragile foundation. Trust in God, by contrast, is not dependent on financial conditions. It does not fluctuate with markets or circumstances. It exists independently of abundance or lack. This does not remove difficulty from life, but it reframes how difficulty is experienced. When money is the primary source of trust, loss feels like collapse. When trust is rooted elsewhere, loss becomes a challenge rather than a definition of identity. Financial instability becomes real, but not ultimate. This shift is not automatic. It develops through repeated decisions. Each financial choice becomes a small expression of trust: how resources are used, how risk is approached, how uncertainty is handled. Over time, these choices reveal where confidence truly lies. There is also a subtle test in abundance. When finances are strong, it is easy to believe control is complete. Planning feels sufficient. Independence feels secure. Trust can quietly shift towards self-reliance without obvious warning. Conversely, scarcity exposes dependence more clearly. It reveals what is truly being leaned on when resources are limited. It can produce fear, but it can also clarify priorities. The Bible does not romanticize either condition. Instead, it calls for consistency in trust regardless of circumstance. Stability in faith, not stability in finances, becomes the anchor. This does not remove practical responsibility. Budgeting, saving, working, and planning remain important, but they are no longer the source of ultimate security. That role belongs elsewhere. Over time, this perspective changes the emotional weight of money. It reduces the pressure to make. Finances carry more meaning than they were designed to hold. It creates space for peace even in uncertainty, and perspective even in change. Because when money is no longer the foundation of trust, it becomes what it was always meant to be: a tool, not a source of ultimate security. Chapter 10. Eternal Perspective on Wealth. Money feels permanent when you are holding it, and temporary when you are losing it, but in reality, it is always temporary. The Bible repeatedly draws attention to this reality, not to diminish the importance of money, but to reframe its place in the larger story of life. Wealth is useful, influential, and often necessary for navigating the world, yet it is never lasting in the way people instinctively assume. It cannot be carried beyond this life. This truth changes the way wealth is understood. If money is temporary, then the question is no longer simply how much is accumulated, but what it is used for while it is available. This is where the idea of eternal perspective begins. An eternal perspective does not ignore present needs or responsibilities. It does not reject planning, saving, or building. Instead, it places them within a wider frame, one that considers long-term impact beyond immediate outcomes. In this view, money is no longer an end in itself. It becomes a means of creating value that extends beyond personal benefit. What is done with wealth today can shape lives, influence communities, and leave effects that outlast the lifespan of the one who earned it. This is one of the most significant shifts in biblical thinking about money. Permanence is not found in possession, but in impact. Acts of generosity, integrity, and compassion carry a different kind of weight. They do not disappear when financial accounts are closed or resources are gone. Their influence continues through people, relationships, and outcomes that persist over time. In contrast, money that is only accumulated tends to remain limited to its moment of use. It may provide comfort or status, but its influence often ends where it is spent. This is not a judgment on wealth itself, but on direction. Two people can have the same financial resources and produce entirely different outcomes depending on how those resources are used. One may focus entirely on personal security, while the other uses wealth to support, build, and uplift. The difference is not in the amount, but in the purpose. An eternal perspective also reshapes priorities. It raises questions that go beyond immediate benefit. What will this decision contribute to others? What will remain after this moment passes? What kind of impact will this create beyond personal gain? These questions do not remove enjoyment or success from financial life. Instead, they add depth to it. They prevent money from becoming an isolated pursuit disconnected from meaning. They connect financial decisions to something larger than personal accumulation. This perspective also brings clarity in times of uncertainty. When wealth fluctuates, it is easy to feel as though value is lost. But when impact becomes the measure, value is no longer tied only to what is held, but also to what has been done. Even in seasons of financial loss, what has already been given, shared, or built retains significance. Over time, this changes how success is defined. Success is no longer measured only by accumulation, but by contribution, not just by what is gained, but by what is done with what is gained. It shifts focus from possession to purpose. This does not diminish the importance of wise financial management. On the contrary, it increases it. If money is temporary, but impact is lasting, then how it is handled becomes even more significant. Carelessness reduces potential impact. Wisdom expands it. In the end, an eternal perspective does not deny the reality of wealth, it reorders it. It places money in its proper position, valuable, but not ultimate, useful, but not permanent, significant, but not final, because while money itself will not last, what it is used to do can echo far beyond it. Bonus chapter: Can anyone pursue wealth? For many people, wealth feels morally and emotionally complicated. Some view it as freedom and opportunity. Others see it as dangerous, corrupting, or spiritually empty. Many people live somewhere in between, wanting financial success while quietly wondering whether pursuing wealth changes a person for the worse. The tension is understandable. Money affects nearly every part of life. It influences where people live, the opportunities they have, the pressure they feel, and the choices they can make. Financial stability can create peace and flexibility, while financial hardship can create constant stress and limitation. Because of this, the desire to become wealthier is deeply human. Wanting to improve your life is not wrong. Wanting security is not wrong. Wanting opportunity is not wrong. Wanting freedom from constant financial pressure is not wrong. The deeper question is not whether someone pursues wealth. The deeper question is why. This is where the conversation becomes more important. Wealth itself is not inherently good or evil. Money is a tool. It amplifies intentions more than it creates them. In the hands of one person, wealth can become generosity, innovation, stability, and opportunity. In the hands of another, it can become greed, excess, control, or isolation. The difference is not found in the money itself, but in the mindset surrounding it. Many people begin pursuing wealth for reasonable reasons. They want to provide for family, build a better future, escape financial anxiety, or create more freedom in life. These motivations are understandable and often healthy, but wealth has a subtle power. Over time, the pursuit of more can quietly shift from purpose to obsession. Success becomes tied to identity. Comparison intensifies. Rest becomes difficult. Enough becomes impossible to define. The problem is not growth. The problem begins when growth becomes the center of life. This is why wisdom matters more than accumulation. A wise person understands that money can improve certain aspects of life, but it cannot fully satisfy deeper human needs. Wealth can buy comfort, but not meaning. It can reduce certain fears, but not eliminate insecurity. It can create options, but it cannot answer questions about purpose, fulfillment, or identity. Still, it is important not to romanticize financial struggle. Lack of money creates real pressure. It limits choices, increases stress, and can affect relationships, health, and emotional well-being. There is nothing noble about unnecessary financial chaos. Building wealth responsibly can create stability not only for oneself, but for future generations as well. In this sense, wealth can become constructive. It can, create opportunities, provide safety during hardship, support families, allow greater generosity, reduce unnecessary stress, and expand the ability to contribute to others. But how wealth is built matters. Shortcuts, exploitation, dishonesty, and reckless ambition may produce quick results, but they often carry hidden costs. Sustainable wealth is usually connected to patience, discipline, integrity, consistency, and long-term thinking. This stands in contrast to a culture obsessed with speed. Modern society constantly promotes immediate success, faster profits, faster growth, faster recognition. Social comparison intensifies the pressure, making ordinary progress feel insufficient. Many people become trapped chasing appearances rather than building stability. But lasting wealth is rarely built overnight. More often, it grows quietly through small decisions repeated consistently over time. Disciplined saving, wise investing, steady work, continual learning, delayed gratification, and thoughtful risk-taking. This approach may appear slower, but it is usually far more stable. At the same time, pursuing wealth requires boundaries. Without boundaries, ambition becomes endless. Every milestone simply creates another target. Satisfaction keeps moving further away. Life becomes defined by constant striving, and success loses its ability to satisfy. This is why contentment remains essential. Contentment does not prevent growth. It protects people from becoming consumed by growth. It allows someone to pursue improvement without making self-worth dependent on constant financial increase. A healthy relationship with wealth requires both ambition and restraint. Too little ambition can lead to stagnation and unnecessary struggle. Too little restraint can lead to greed, burnout, and imbalance. Wisdom lies between these extremes. It recognizes that money is valuable, but not ultimate, useful, but not absolute, important, but not capable of carrying the full weight of human meaning. Over time, wealth reveals priorities. It shows what people value, what they fear, and what they are willing to sacrifice. This is why financial decisions are rarely just financial. They often reflect deeper beliefs about success, security, identity, and purpose. For this reason, Anyone pursuing wealth should periodically ask difficult questions. Why do I want more? What am I sacrificing to obtain it? Will more actually improve my life, or simply increase my appetite for more? Am I building wealth, or building my identity around wealth? Can I enjoy money without becoming controlled by it? These questions create clarity, because the danger of wealth is not always poverty of character, it is often distraction. Money can slowly convince people that external success is the same thing as internal fulfillment, but they are not the same. A person can be wealthy and deeply empty. A person can also build wealth wisely while remaining grounded, generous, and purposeful. The difference lies in whether money remains a tool or becomes a master. In the end, there is nothing wrong with pursuing wealth. The real challenge is pursuing it without losing yourself in the process, because money is most powerful not when it is endlessly chased, but when it is wisely built, responsibly managed, and used in ways that create meaning beyond personal gain. Conclusion: redefining true wealth. When most people think about wealth, they think in numbers: income, savings, assets, and growth. But the Bible consistently pushes the definition of wealth beyond what can be counted. It shifts attention away from accumulation and towards something far less measurable, yet far more enduring. True wealth, in the biblical sense, is not confined to money. It includes wisdom in decision-making, peace in the midst of uncertainty, integrity in how resources are earned, and generosity in how they are shared. It includes the ability to be content without constant striving, and the freedom to use money without being controlled by it. Money still matters. It has real power in daily life. It provides food, shelter, opportunity, and stability. But it was never designed to carry the weight of ultimate meaning. When it is asked to provide identity, security, or purpose, it inevitably falls short. This is where distortion begins. Money becomes more than a tool. It becomes a measure of worth. It becomes a source of comparison. It becomes something to chase endlessly or fear losing. And in that process, it slowly shifts from serving life to shaping it. The biblical perspective challenges this reversal. It calls for a return to balance where money is important, but not ultimate, where it is managed wisely, but not worshipped, where it is used intentionally, but not idolized. This shift does not require rejecting financial success. It requires reinterpreting it. Success is no longer defined only by what is accumulated, but by what is aligned. Does money reflect integrity? Does it support generosity? Does it create stability without creating dependence? Does it serve what truly matters, or replace it? These questions reframe the entire conversation, because in the end, the issue is not simply financial, it is foundational. Money reveals what a person values most. It exposes priorities that words alone cannot always express. This is why the Bible speaks so often about it, not to control behavior, but to reveal the heart. When seen through this lens, money becomes a kind of reflection. It shows what is trusted, what is feared, and what is pursued. It is less about the numbers themselves and more about what those numbers represent. Redefining true wealth means stepping back from cultural assumptions and asking deeper questions. What actually brings lasting peace? What creates a meaningful life? What remains valuable when money is no longer present? The answers rarely point only to financial success. They point toward relationships, purpose, character, and perspective, things that cannot be easily measured, but are deeply felt. This does not make money unimportant. It makes it properly placed. When money is understood as a tool rather than a destination, it regains its rightful function. It can be used wisely, generously, and responsibly without dominating the life of the one who holds it. In that balance, something shifts. Money becomes lighter. Decisions become clearer. Anxiety loses some of its influence. Generosity becomes more natural. Contentment becomes more accessible. And perhaps most importantly, wealth is no longer confused with worth. Because in the end, true wealth is not defined by what is in your hands, but by what is in your heart, how you live, and what your life builds beyond yourself.